Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Scott Luton with you here on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's very special live stream because today on Breaking News Now, we're focused on an important topic that perhaps needs a whole bunch more visibility and awareness across global business and supply chain: underwater infrastructure. For example, have you heard about the regular tax to undersea cables over the last year or so? We're going to be diving into that as well as broader topics when it comes to maritime challenges and global trade. So, to do just that, we have one heck of a dynamic guest joining us. So, our guest is an ex naval officer that brings exceptional knowledge, insights, and current intel to the table. Now, he founded Winward back in 2010 and he took it public in 2021 after dramatic market growth. He's received numerous accolades and a whole bunch of recognition over the years, including being listed by the Wall Street Journal as one of the top 100 tech leaders you just got to know back in 2022. Our guest is sought after regularly to share his expertise as to trading, shipping, ocean freight, and maritime security. I want to welcome in Ami Daniel, co-founder and CEO with Winward. Hey, Ami, how you doing?
I like the background. I like being here with you, man. It's a big day. How are you? A lot of things happening.
Lot of things happen. I tell you what. Speaking of, no shortage of things across global trade landscape, right? Tariffs, innovation, disruption, so much more. And as we talked about in the green room, the annual TPM trade conference just around the corner. So lots of ocean shipping conversations coming up. Very timely, I should add. So with all that as a backdrop, and also should say in the green room, I loved your phrase. It's time to cowboy up, right? I mean. So,
Let's cowboy up, man. Yes, let's
oh
do it.
gosh. So I want to gain your perspective on a variety of ocean-based topics that all pose varying levels of risk to global supply chains everywhere. And I want to start with a couple stories before we get you to weigh in. And let's start with this one. As Data Center Dynamics recently reported, quote, cable damages in European waters have been rife in recent months. At the end of last year, the S-Link 2 subsea cable between Finland and Estonia was cut. Around the same time, three internet cables connecting the two nations were also cut. And a fourth fiber optic cable between Finland and Germany was also cut, end quote. Cut and quote. Those words do not go together well. But just this week, CNN reported that Taiwan's Coast Guard detained a cargo ship and its Chinese crew who allegedly had damaged the island country's undersea communication lines. So, Ami, I've really enjoyed your reporting and you and the Windward team's reporting on this and many other matters. Help us unpack what's going on here and what to expect moving forward.
Sure. First of all, if you're watching this on your internet, you're using undersea cables. And if you have electricity in your home, you're using undersea cables. And if you made a phone call with your landline, you're kind of using, I think you're seeing where I'm going, right? Undersea
Right.
cables. And if you're heating your house in the cold winter, I hear it's pretty cold, and I'll be in New York next week, and you're using undersea pipeline. So
Mm.
we're all basically using undersea pipeline. The world is just literally without, and the ocean ground is literally without. I think it's very important to understand. So I think what we're seeing the last, let's call it 6 months,
Yeah.
and I have to say, I've known this undersea, let's call it issue for 10 years now, but it used to be more about Russians and Chinese tapping into fiber optics
Yep.
versus less sabotage. And it's become big time sabotage over the last few months. So what we're seeing is what's called gray zone tactics. It's things like, it's very similar to false flag, or let's call it plausible deniability operations. You have the
Mhm.
Russians and Chinese who want to hurt you where it hurts, but not necessarily be accounted for. So because these undersea cables are so important, so big, looks like, obviously, allegedly, looks like they've been using ships to drag their anchors a bit too much across Taiwan, the Baltic, and so forth. And I think that's the point. It's not military action. I would say now that cyber has become so important and so on the spotlight, we have
Yep.
two spaces that are left really unmonitored. One is the underwater space, and one is the space, really, obviously outside, like
Sure.
galaxy and stuff. So these are the areas which are the most exposed right now, and I think that's where we'll see Russia and China hitting. I think that's what we're seeing in the undersea cables. I can tell you that companies like Amazon, Meta, Google should be very worried about that. We're talking to a bunch of telco operators, grid operators, electricity operators. We have energy companies using our products to do risk management. And I think the problem is, if I need to simplify it, is there's just too many ships.
Right.
These companies are not really built for that. If you have a cable under the North Sea or on the North Sea bed, you could have 3,000 ships operating there. So are you going to check all of them? What are you going to do? Who's even responsible for government? Governments haven't figured out who's supposed to deal with it. So we have the pleasure of and the privilege of both supporting the government side as well as the private sector. And I think everybody should be aware of it. You have a cable cut, I think, maybe once a week now for the
Yep.
last 3 months.
Yep.
So that's big. We've never seen that really.
So, all right. So there's a lot there. I want to pull out a couple of things, and then we're going to talk about the gray and dark fleets that I think a lot of folks aren't familiar with. Number one, I think most importantly, is how you opened. Folks may not know out there. Of course, Supply Chain Now has the sharpest audience in all of global trade, but a lot of folks may not be aware of just how heavily utilized and critical these undersea cables are, to your points earlier. So take that away first, folks. I think secondly, with the MO of these cable damaging cable attacks, you mentioned drag anchors. That seems to indicate to me, that it gives the bad actors plausible deniability as a, oh look, I'm so sorry, look what we did, we had no idea. And that's part of this, what do they call it, it's not warfare, it's
gray zone tactics.
Gray zone tactics. So one last comment there before we shift over to some of these dark fleets.
One last comment for me. Listen, I've sailed for many years, and like no shipping a bit. There is no chance on Earth that you have an anchor dropped for like 10 miles and you don't notice.
Right.
Because all your ship is going to go like that type, right? So it's like driving on rubble, basically. It just doesn't happen. So like everybody's like, oh my God, it was a mistake. Well, and mistakes could happen, of course. But statistically speaking, these mistakes have been happening about 10 times more this year than last year. So there hasn't been more mistakes that much. You could expect a 10% difference, not 10 times difference. So clearly, and this is happening off Taiwan, which is clearly an issue with China, and this has been happening off the countries which have been opposing Russia. Please remember, Finland, Sweden join NATO. You have some other countries in Europe, like Latvia, who are now independent from Russian energy over the last 2 weeks. So I think I would expect what we're seeing is Russia is maybe hitting, maybe not hitting where it hurts them, and China may be hitting, maybe not hitting where it hurts them.
Right. One last thought. We're going to move along to these gray and dark fleets. Folks, if you want to kind of to what Ami had said earlier, if you want to isolate countries or regions or certain populations, one of the most important things to do is sever their connection to the internet and the exchange of data and other societies around the globe. So these are no coincidences. And you heard it here from Ami, who served on naval vessels. If your anchor is dragging and takes out a massive cable or seven. Okay, I want to shift over. Really enjoy you and the Winward team and all of your reporting. Recently, you were sharing information about gray and dark fleets, and I'm sharing this graphic here from y'all's reporting. In fact, you shared that Europe had just announced new sanctions on Russia, in part targeting its shadow fleet. So would you define what we're talking about with gray, dark fleets, shadow fleets? What are we talking about?
Sure. I want to take a step back because I think it's important to understand what's happening in the world. Basically, you have 90 million barrels of oil being produced daily, give or take, más o menos, as they would like to say. Okay.
Yep.
And when Russia invaded Ukraine 3 years ago, the U.S. and its allies have made Russia the most sanctioned country on earth very, very fast.
Yep.
And that's because Russia exports about 10 million barrels a day of these 90 million barrels, right? and another about 1.5 million of oil products like gasoline and jet fuel and so forth. So, and the goal of these sanctions in Russia, what's called the Russian price cap, was to A, keep the Russian oil flowing, while B, not stopping it. And I think what Russia did, and what we know now, because I'm part of the UK sanctions task force and the maritime sanctions task force, what we know now they've done is they've been preparing for this invasion for a long while, because the day of the invasion, they opened 3,500 new companies the same day in Dubai and the free zone to try and circumvent these sanctions. And now comes the shadow fleet. What happened is they basically have detached from the global system of trade and transport, which is very important because it keeps the ocean safe and clean. A global system of shipping and insurance and so forth ensures that pictures like the Exxon Valdez in 1989 off Alaska of penguins full with oil,
Right.
very bad pictures, do not come back. Why? Because since then, there has been development of safety precautions, procedures, vetting, and so on and so forth globally, which companies like Exxon, BP, Shell, and so forth lead. They're called the Six Sisters. Russia has effectively detached itself from this system and have operated and built a fully new ecosystem of ocean transportation to allow itself to export oil above and beyond what the sanctions limit them. That new system they've built is called the shadow fleet, or the gray fleet, the dark fleet, which means basically crappy old vessels, rust buckets, sailing the oceans with a lot of oil. And because it has been 3 years now, we're seeing more and more safety issues with these vessels. There are oil leaks, they have accidents, their engines stop working, and so on and so forth, which makes sense because they don't get proper maintenance and and repairs and so forth. And now comes the new administration.
Right.
And I think what we're seeing in the last 2 weeks is a big separation between the new administration and UK and Europe. For the 3rd year of the anniversary of Russia invading Ukraine, you have the EU and the UK heavily sanction Russia, and the US sanction Iran on the same day of the invasion. And the reason is it looks like the White House would like to try and have a peace settlement with Russia, while the EU and the UK are on their path saying, we will not be imposed on a peace agreement. We are a threat. Russia is a threat to us, to the EU and the UK. And I think you're seeing Keir Starmer say that, and you've seen the EU say that. So that shadow fleet has been growing consistently, and it's becoming a danger to, by the way, we've seen a peak of trade of these shadow fleet vessels in Barbados, in Antigua and Bermuda, in Latin America and the Caribbean. So if you like to keep on going to your nice vacations, my friends, having a nice cocktail on the beach in Bermuda or Barbados, and having the ocean still to be very blue and the sun being very white, you don't want any shadow fleets vessels there, and I'm not sure that's the situation right now. Is that a comprehensive enough answer for you?
Yes, and I want to one quick follow up, because I want to offer up how y'all track this, right? And
Yeah.
this, y'all can find all this at winward.ai. The top 3 flags, according to y'all's data, for dark and gray fleets: Panama, Liberia, and Russia. Any can you, in very succinctly, can you share why that is,
Sure.
other than Russia, obviously?
Sure. So Panama and Liberia, what's called flag of convenience, which are open registries. You can pay money to a private company, which I think is actually based in Washington, D.C., if I remember correctly, and get a Liberia flag. It's not the government of Liberia. It's a franchise. And in Panama, it is the government, and the U.S. has been cracking down on it.
Okay, excellent.
And Russia is Russia, right?
Russia is Russia. So, folks, we got 2 things here. What we're hearing from Ami. Number 1, we've got to become more aware and track these dark fleets so that we can monitor and manage and prevent incidences from taking place. And then, secondly, we got to get these dark fleets shelved. Is that fair to say?
I think we need to get it sorted, because you either get shelf them or make sure they trade within certain standards. The longer it is, the bigger the chance that you're going to have a big oil spill or
Yeah.
big accidents like the Maersk vessel ramming into that bridge,
Right.
which was, I think, child's play versus what you're talking about, these rust buckets.
Yeah. You're talking about up in Baltimore, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Okay. Moving right along, folks. I wish we had 3 hours with Ami. There's so much going on across our oceans related to global trade or related to geopolitics and so
Let's
much
talk
more.
tariffs. Let's talk
So
tariffs.
we're getting there. We're getting there.
Okay.
One
Okay.
more
I'm
quick.
getting edgy. I'm getting edgy with the tariffs.
So the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea,
Yeah.
man, they just
Yeah.
keep going and going and going,
Yeah.
adding risk
Of
to
course
one of
they
the
are.
most important waterways in the world. Just a few days ago,
Sure.
as reported by Reuters, Houthi rebels fired a surface-to-air missile at a U.S. Air Force F-16, as well as an MQ-9 drone. The former was a first. A couple of quick
Yep.
thoughts here, what we're seeing here, Ami.
Yeah. First of all, the Houthis are here to stay. It's not about Israel. It's not about, the sweats. It's about them.
Yeah,
Okay. This makes them relevant. Who, in God's sake, were the Houthis 3 years ago? Who heard of them? Right?
right.
And now they're on your show.
Mm.
They got Scott Luton talking about them. Which you can't get any better, I guess. So I think that's the reason they're doing this. It's relevance. They're poking the bear. The United States of America. You have the president and you have the administration and everybody, and still they're doing what they're doing. And by the way, they did shoot down, I think, 7 or 8 MQ-9s already.
Yeah.
So I think they want to stay relevant. Ceasefire with Israel or no ceasefire with Israel. I expect they will find some excuse to do something which will keep them relevant. They're basically a terrorist group, right? And I think they
Right.
were sanctioned recently again by the new administration, which revoked the cancellation of the sanctions by the previous administration. So in any case, it's not going to stop. And we haven't really seen transit and transport rebound via the Suez Canal. I'm not sure the carriers have a vested interest in doing that. They're making everybody in shipping is making much more money by going
Mm.
around the Suez Canal.
Mm.
Okay. Who is not making money is Egypt. They're losing their pants.
Right. Excellent call out there. And I would just add one more observation before we shift over to those tariffs and Ami's ready to jump in.
Yeah.
That F-16, that's an Air Force asset,
Yep.
right? And it's small, but it just illustrates what I've read is the U.S. Navy has been under attack longer, the most since World War II in terms of
Yep.
them trying to
Correct.
contain Houthi activities.
Correct.
This F-16 in theater shows how we're trying to bring U.S. Air Force assets to contain the ongoing threat. And I would just add one more
Correct.
thing, Ami. I've seen reporting here in the last month or so where the U.S. and allies are trying to go after the supply chains that empower the Houthis. So we shall
Yep.
see. But Ami, to your last point, the world's still making lots of money despite our efforts at tamping down the violence, huh?
And money makes the world go round. Yes.
All right. Okay. Speaking of the last few days, in fact, in the last few hours, in some cases, the White House has announced.
Yeah.
And
Who knows? Who's tracking? You need to Google ahead of every conversation, right?
I need a bigger radar on me. That's
Yeah.
what I'm learning. So
Yeah.
the White House has announced an additional 10% tariff on Chinese goods. Not talking about the one they announced a month or so ago, but an additional 10% tariff. And they have announced that the 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada that have been delayed while negotiations still continue. They're set to be implemented March 4th, which was confirmed yesterday. So,
And Macron, the French president, was in the White House, and it was just published 27 minutes ago. I checked, or 30 minutes ago, that he was quite disappointed because there's probably no way around the U.S. tariffs, and the U.S. is going to slap 25% tariffs on Europe. So it's really quite unprecedented, I believe. And let's see by the way what it leads up to, because I'm not the thing is, if you do this to wait, let's take a step back. Who's
yep,
impacted? First of all the listeners.
right.
Okay, if you theoretically, I think the rationale of the tariffs is let's tariff everything coming into the U.S. so people move their supply chains into the U.S. Right? I think clearly that's the idea. And
Yep.
we can make America.
I'm not saying it. You say it.
Yeah. I was hoping.
You're
I
referencing the MAGA creed, of course. I got you.
Of course. I was hoping for you to complete my sentence with a big bang. So theoretically, it could be right in the long term, but in practice, it takes quite a bit of time to move supply chains, factories, companies into the United States of America. So I think it's more likely than not that in the short term, you're going to see the prices go up in the US, and therefore inflation boiling up a bit in the US, because it's basically a lot of big trade partners. It's the EU, it's China, Mexico, Canada, all for about 25%. So that price needs to be paid by somebody, right? 25%. So it's imports, it's parts, and so forth. So theoretically, you could see vehicles that are manufactured in the US to be more attractive, like some of the Teslas. However, if their parts are imported outside of the US, they'll still be more expensive. And I don't think anybody has rolled that out completely yet into their price list. So
Sure.
so let's see where it ends up. But I'm not sure at this scale and this speed, it's not going to hurt the US economy in the coming 6 to 9 months.
So, Ami, I was just sharing on social this morning. We have an upcoming show focused on tariffs, and our guest was talking about what we learned in college economics class.
And you haven't invited me? Oh my God.
No,
Okay,
we will we'll
come
do
on.
that.
You know I like tariffs, you know?
So, well, I'm not crazy about tariffs, and I'm no
Yeah.
economist, right? So I'll
Yeah.
let your predictions
Okay.
be as they may.
Yeah.
However, to Jeremy is asking, how do tariffs lower personnel costs? Well, in many ways, they're going to rise. They're going to make a bunch of costs go up, right, Jeremy?
Yeah.
But I
I'm not
am
saying I don't think they're lowering personnel costs.
right.
I think it's not about personnel tariffs. It's about imports and parts. So
That's right. That's right.
yeah.
Here's
Yeah.
the deal, though. Here's the deal. Not talking about Chinese tariffs. I'm not going to touch on the EU, the European tariffs, whether it's
Yeah.
UK or any other countries. But
Yeah.
I am going to hold out hope that we still have a week or so to go in the Mexico, U.S., and Canada
Yeah.
negotiations. And my hope is, and we saw some glimmers, my hope is we can protect one of the most unique regions of the world when it comes to global trade, and then use that as some foundational footing to maybe make some progress with our European allies, our very special friends there. So we shall see. I mean, your last word, and then we're going to get to AI and some other exciting news. I mean,
Yeah. I'm saying I think shipping used to be a cost center, and that's it. Would be very simple. You would just find a ship and get it done.
yep,
Now I think all these tariffs, I think, will change a lot of how people source, buy, import. If you have a Chinese built ship, it might cost you $1 million to go into port. Who cares where your ship is built previously, right? Like, could be Korea, whatever.
right.
You would have traded 3 times. Somebody 20 years ago who would have built in China. You don't know. You don't even know this guy, right? So that's a consideration. Where you're importing for, that's a consideration.
Yes.
Who you're buying for, that's a consideration. So remember, Vietnam became quite a big manufacturing hub because of tariffs. Don't forget that. Because the US slapped tariffs and limitations on China. People would manufacture about 90% in China, ship it to Vietnam, finish up the last 10%, slap a price and a price tag and a logo on it, and export it as Vietnamese.
Right.
So there's kind of a bit of a push and pull, I think, on the whole supply chain and the industry based on this conversation. I hope this makes sense. I don't know.
No, it does. It does. Two quick thoughts, and we're gonna move on. You're pointing
I'm
out
trying to
all
keep up with you. My brain is like, let's see.
right. You're talking about all the inputs that go into the modern day supply chain equation. Number one,
Correct.
right, and number two, to your point about Vietnam and China and many other countries, a lot of companies have made shifts. But to your point, a lot of the actual component and assembly and foundational aspects of their supply chain operations still go back to China. They're just slapping different labels on it. So we've got to shine a bigger flashlight and continue to have our policies that have oftentimes have some very very sound intentions. We got to continue tweaking them to make them more effective. We shall see. Okay, I mean, AI, no shortage of opinions out there when it comes to how artificial intelligence will continue to impact not just supply chain management, but the future of work in general. Now, you are intrigued, opinionated, passionate, you name it, as it relates to how the AI,
not about that, right? Okay.
as it relates to how AI will disrupt the BPO, otherwise known as business process outsourcing market. Give us a few thoughts here.
Sure. So I think first of all, BPO is a $500 billion business, just to be
Wow.
clear. Okay. When I say half a trillion, that's because people basically outsource to Philippines, Thailand, and so forth, cheaper countries, if you will, tedious, repetitive tasks. Anybody who's used ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity or any one of these or Gemini knows that by now it's quite impactful and quite easy, I think, to do a lot of the things we couldn't do before. For example, I wanted to do some research about a new school for my kids.
Yeah.
So instead of spending 5 hours on the internet, I wrote a ChatGPT deep research. Hello, my kids are so and so. One is going to senior. One is in prep school. This is what's important to them. This is what they like. This is what they currently study. This is their GPA. Can you please analyze these schools for me? And this could have happened. I did this like a year ago. It took me a week. It went off for 30 minutes and he just gave me the answer. And I think the answer is better than I could have got myself. It's a very good example. Now we're talking supply chain. Supply chain
Right.
has gazillion tedious repetitive actions. Haulage booking, demurrage and detention, invoice validation, rate extraction. You have a lot of data really within a lot of unstructured documents, PDFs, Excels, documents that nobody's really tapping into. AI is revolutionizing that. You have almost out of the box document extraction right now and document management today. So you can shoot up 200 pages of PDF and get all of it in a table. It's not 100%, but it will be
Right.
soon. So that's one big difference for supply chain. The second is all these tedious, repetitive actions. I meet a lot of forwarders who tell me, could you help me reimagine my company and have 1,000 agents working for me so I don't shrink my companies in bad time and expand my company in good times, which is
Mm.
what's happening to logistics. This
Yes.
hiring cycle is tedious. You need a process and SOPs and so forth. Could you do that? I think you will be able to do that 9, 10, 12 months ago. And in the world of tech and enterprise, if you don't start now, you won't get there in 12 months. So I think it's really big, 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 big for this industry.
Outstanding. So you're that $500 billion BPO market is poised to be massively disrupted is the takeaway I'm getting from you, Ami. Is
Yep,
that right? Okay.
correct.
Stay tuned. We'll have Ami back where he has plenty of informed and expert opinions. But before you go, Ami, got two final questions for you because I think this has been a big week for the Winward team. What is one thing that you're most excited about at Winward right now?
So we've launched this week a new product called the margin detention automation. Everybody in supply chain knows the margin detention is a backbone problem for the industry. Basically, every time you ship an ocean container, you borrow it from the carrier and you get to give it back. Everybody does it in the back of a different contract, different rate, different time, just to calculate it. The carrier sends you an invoice. It's 6 months afterwards. You don't close the P&L. Your cash flow is impacted. Your capital at work is impacted, and so on and so forth. So we've been at this for about a year and a half now. We launched this week a fully automated product for the margin detention automation. We're seeing customers see significant ROI on using it. It works great like magic. Plug it in, automate your demargin detention, get your cash flow back, get more capital, make your customers happier, and automate that. Customers are loving it. It works.
I love it, man.
Very simple.
Ami, last time you joined us live, I think it was me and you and my dear friend Kevin L. Jackson, and I think
Yeah, I
um,
loved it.
he's great. Y'all two were quite a one-two punch. I think I shared with you then that if we could just find a way to plug up the global power grid to Ami Daniel, that would solve at least 20% of our
Yeah,
growing
I'm
power
trying to.
demands. We got to figure that out. But hey, I love your
Thank you very
passion.
much.
I love your passion. More importantly, I love the innovation you're driving, changing how business is done, especially from a intel and enabling businesses to make better, smarter, more confident decisions and be more informed. That's a big part of the game here. So how can
Yep.
folks connect with you and the Winward team?
Ami Daniel on LinkedIn or winward.ai. Just reach out, Ami at winward.ai. Easy.
All right. It's just that easy. And we're dropping a link there, winward.ai. You can plug into some of the data we reference, some of the products we reference, and of course, the one and only Ami Daniel. Big thanks to Ami Daniel with Winward. Ami, we're going to have you back soon. All right. You promise?
Thank you very much. Need to
Okay.
finish with my shades.
Hey, folks, hopefully you've enjoyed and learned from this conversation as much as I have. Be sure to connect with Ami and the innovative Winward team. Even more important, folks, get past the headlines and the hype so you'll be more in the know. And as we're talking about, you'll be in better position to make better, faster, and more informed decisions. With all that said, on behalf of the entire team here at Supply Chain Now, Scott Luton challenging you, do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. And we'll see you next time right back here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.